The millionaire stopped when he heard the single mother on the phone. She spoke 5 languages like a professional spy. Curious, he followed her until he discovered a shocking secret. What he did next left everyone in shock. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you are watching us. We continue. On one of the highest floors of the Torre Europa, in the heart of the capital, Tiago Moreau smiled politely as he raised his glass of champagne in a toast. The charity event for the São Paulo Business Association was just another event on his busy schedule. At 42, Tiago was one of the most respected real estate entrepreneurs in the country, with ventures spread across the country. His tailored Italian suit and Swiss watch were just outward symbols of what everyone already knew. He had earned his place among the local financial elite. To the success of all of us, and to the generosity that brings us together tonight, said Ricardo. Verlois, president of the association, addressing the guests. Everyone toasted, and Tiago sipped his champagne, already thinking about his strategic exit. These parties, although necessary to maintain his network of contacts, were becoming increasingly empty in his eyes. Tiago, my friend, we need to talk about that land in Alphaville, said a grey-haired man, approaching familiarly. I have interested investors. Sure, Fernando. We can arrange a lunch next week, he replied automatically, with the rehearsed smile he wore for these occasions. In recent years, Tiago had become a master at keeping up appearances. While everyone saw him as the epitome of a successful businessman, he felt a growing emptiness. Divorced for 5 years and childless, his life consisted of meetings, business trips, and social events that served only to keep the wheels turning. The penthouse apartment in Jardim, with panoramic views of Parque Villa, was more of a status symbol than a home. After another hour of superficial conversation, Tiago finally managed to say goodbye. In the elevator, he loosened his tie and took a deep breath. The night was still young, but the idea of returning to his empty penthouse didn't excite him. He decided to do something different. He would go to Café Europa, an unpretentious place he had discovered weeks ago and where no one recognized him. The café was a contrast to the places he frequented. Decorated with rustic furniture and warm lighting, it was frequented by students, artists, and locals. Tiago enjoyed the anonymity he found there. He ordered an espresso and sat in a discreet corner. That's when he heard it. A female voice, naturally alternating between Portuguese, English, French, Spanish, and what seemed to be Italian. Intrigued, Tiago looked at the table next to him, where a woman of about 35 years old was talking on the phone, organizing what seemed to be a complicated schedule. Yes, I can do the translation by Wednesday. No problem, I can handle that. Project as well. Oh, of course, I can translate the documents into French too. Thank you for trusting my work. Yes, I can do it perfectly. When she hung up, she let out a tired sigh and ran a hand through her curly hair. There was something about her that captured Tiago's attention. It wasn't just her impressive facility with languages, but a dignity and strength that shone through in her simplest gestures. Sorry for the indiscretion, Tiago said, unable to contain his curiosity, but I couldn't help but notice your skill with languages. It's truly impressive. The woman looked at him with an expression that mixed surprise and a certain caution. Her eyes, a deep brown, analyzed him briefly before answering. Thank you. It's a useful skill in my job. And what would your job be, if I may ask? I'm a freelance translator, she replied, closing her laptop. I do translations, interpretations, occasional teaching, whatever comes up, really. My name is Tiago. He introduced himself, extending his hand. Juliana, she replied, accepting the greeting with a firmness that surprised him. Juliana Diaz. Something about the way Juliana carried herself intrigued Tiago. Unlike the women in his social circle, she didn't seem impressed by his appearance or interested in prolonging the conversation. There was an independence in her demeanor that attracted him in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. Do you frequent this cafe regularly? He asked, trying to keep the conversation going. Whenever I can. It's close to my son's school, she replied, checking her watch. Which, by the way, I have to pick up in 20 minutes. Do you have a son? How old is he? Daniel is 13, Juliana said, and for the first time her face lit up with a genuine smile. He's an amazing boy. He plays the violin like no one else. The mention of the violin piqued Tiago's interest. Really, I love classical music. Does he study at a conservatory? Juliana's smile faded a little. No, for now he's only taking classes at a public school, but his teacher says he's very talented. Tiago noticed the subtle change in her expression and understood what was not said. Conservatory classes were expensive, and clearly not within the reach of a freelance translator. You said you teach languages too? He asked, an idea beginning to form in his mind. Yes, when I get students. I used to be a full-time teacher at a language school, but circumstances have changed, she replied, starting to pack her things into her bag. I'm looking for someone to help me with my French, Tiago said, making a snap decision. I have business in France, and although I manage well, I'd like to improve. Would you be interested? Juliana stopped what she was doing and looked at him with a suspicious expression. Why me? There are excellent language schools in the capital. I prefer private lessons, and after hearing you speak, I think you would be the ideal teacher, he replied sincerely. She studied him for a moment as if assessing his intentions. I can give you my card, she said finally. If you're really interested, we can talk about hours and rates. Tiago accepted the simple card which said, Juliana Diaz, translator and language teacher, followed by a phone number, and email address. There was no address. I'll be in touch, he promised. Juliana nodded, picked up her bag and empty cup and stood up. I have to go now. It was nice meeting you, Tiago. He watched her walk up to the counter, hand the cup back to the barista with a kind smile and leave the cafe. There was something about this woman that made him want to know more, not just about her, but about the world she inhabited, so different from his own. Looking at the card in his hands, Tiago felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Genuine curiosity about someone other than himself. At that moment, without him realizing it, something had changed in his life. The chance encounter with Juliana Diaz would be just the beginning of a journey that would lead him to question everything he considered important. The following afternoon, while absent-mindedly attending a meeting with his executives, Tiago found himself thinking about Juliana and her violinist son. The words in his mind contrasted sharply with the profit charts projected on the conference room screen. He decided he would call her today. Something told him that their meeting had not been by chance. Juliana Diaz lived in a simple apartment. The space was small but well organized. A living room that also served as her makeshift office, 2 compact bedrooms, a kitchen and a bathroom. The most striking features of the space were the shelves full of books in different languages and, in the living room, a violin carefully positioned on a special stand, contrasting with the modest furniture. That night, as she prepared dinner, Juliana thought about the man she had met at the cafe. There was something about Tiago Moreau that aroused her curiosity, despite all her initial distrust. Years of working as a translator at corporate events had taught her to recognize the type. A successful executive, accustomed to getting whatever he wanted. But there was also a loneliness in his eyes that seemed genuine. Mum, can I practice? For another half hour, Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway, violin in hand, interrupting her thoughts. Have you finished your math homework? He asked as he cut the vegetables. I'm done, the teenager replied, his dark eyes shining with anticipation. Professor Kane said I need to master this passage by Monday. Juliana smiled, unable to resist her son's enthusiasm. Okay, but only for half an hour. Then we'll have dinner. As Daniel walked back to his room, the first chords of Bach filled the small apartment. Juliana sighed, feeling the familiar tightness in her chest. Her son deserved more than she could offer. Lessons with renowned teachers, a better quality instrument, opportunities that were beyond her financial means. Ever since Daniel's father abandoned the family when the boy was just 5 years old, Juliana had been struggling alone. She left her stable job as a teacher at a language school to work as a freelancer, which allowed her to adjust her schedule to her son's needs. The price of this flexibility, however, was the financial instability That followed her like a constant shadow. The ringing of her cell phone brought her back to the present. Unknown number. Hello? Juliana, it's Tiago Moreau from the cafe. She felt a slight jolt of surprise. She hadn't expected him to actually call. Oh, hello, he replied, balancing the phone as he continued to prepare dinner. I hope I'm not disturbing you. I was wondering if we could schedule a trial French lesson. His voice sounded different on the phone, more formal, more restrained. Of course, he replied professionally. When would be convenient for you? As they discussed schedules and prices, Bach's music played in the background, creating an unusual soundtrack for the conversation. At one point, Tiago paused. Is that your son playing? It sounds amazing. Juliana couldn't hide the pride in her voice. Yes, it's Daniel. He practices every day. He's very talented, Tiago commented, and there was a sincerity in his voice that surprised her. They arranged a first lesson for the following afternoon at a coffee shop near his office. When she hung up, Juliana was thoughtful. Something told her that this would not be just another private lesson in her busy schedule. The next day, promptly at 4 p.m., Juliana arrived at the agreed-upon location, a sophisticated coffee shop, on Avenida Principal, quite different from the relaxed atmosphere of Café Europa. Wearing her best blouse and dress pants, she carried a folder with carefully prepared teaching materials. Tiago was already waiting for her, sitting at a discreet table at the back of the establishment. When he saw her, he stood up with a smile. Punctuality is a rare virtue these days, he commented, indicating the chair across from him. It's part of my job, Juliana replied, settling in. As a teacher, I can't afford to waste my students' time. The first class went surprisingly well. Tiago demonstrated a better level of French than he had initially suggested, and Juliana quickly adapted her approach. What began as a review of basic concepts soon turned into a fluid conversation about business and French culture. You really didn't need basic lessons, she observed at the end of the meeting. Your French is very good. Tiago smiled, a little embarrassed. Maybe I exaggerated my difficulties. May I ask why? He hesitated for a moment, as if considering how much to reveal. Honestly, because I wanted to get to know you better. You intrigued me at the cafe. Juliana felt her face heat slightly, torn between discomfort at the admission and a strange appreciation for his honesty. That's unusual, he finally replied. I apologize if this seems inappropriate, Tiago said quickly. But I was really impressed with your linguistic ability and, well, I would also like to know more about your son and his musical talent. The mention of Daniel changed something in Juliana's expression. Why? Because classical music is one of the few things that still really touches me, he replied, with a sincerity that disarmed her. And talent, like the one I heard, even over the phone, deserves to be cultivated. There was a moment of silence between them, filled with the hubbub of the coffee shop. Juliana studied the man in front of her, his impeccable suit, his expensive watch, all the outward signs of success and privilege. Yet there was a vulnerability in his eyes that intrigued her. We can arrange more lessons if you really want to improve your French, she said finally, but I need you to be honest about your intentions. Tiago nodded. Fair enough. What about your son? Is he studying music formally? Only in public school, Juliana replied, a slight defensive tone in her voice. His teacher is good, but the resources are limited. Daniel practices a lot on his own. And you never thought about enrolling him in a conservatory? Juliana let out a sigh. I think about it every day, but the reality is that good conservatories are expensive and scholarships are extremely competitive. Something in Tiago's expression changed, as if an idea was forming in his mind. Before he could say anything, however, Juliana's cell phone rang. Sorry, I have to take this, she said, seeing the name of Daniel's school on the screen. The brief conversation left her visibly worried. When she hung up, she began to hurriedly pack her materials. Is there a problem? Asked Tiago. Daniel has a fever at school. I need to pick him up now, he explained, concern evident in his voice. Can I help you in any way? I have my car here. I can give you a ride. Juliana hesitated for only a second, torn between her pride and concern for her son. That would be very helpful. Thank you. In Tiago's sleek SUV, the contrast between their worlds became even more evident. While he drove with ease through the capital's chaotic traffic, Juliana gave tense instructions, constantly checking her cell phone. The municipal school where Daniel studied was located on a narrow street. The old building, with its faded paintwork, perfectly represented the limitations of the local public education system, a structure with potential but lacking investment. "I'll wait here," Tiago offered, parking in front of the gate. "It shouldn't take long," Juliana replied, quickly exiting the vehicle. Through the car window, Tiago watched as she returned a few minutes later, supporting a thin teenager with curly hair like hers. The boy looked pale, but he was still carefully carrying a violin case. "This is Daniel," Juliana introduced as she got into the car. "Daniel, this is Tiago, a new student." The boy muttered a polite greeting, clearly uncomfortable with the fever. "We need to go home," Juliana said. "It's just a few blocks away." During the short drive, Tiago watched the boy's face in the rearview mirror. There was something about the determination with which he held the violin case, even though he was ill, that touched him deeply. He remembered his own privileged childhood, the piano lessons he had abandoned due to lack of interest, the countless expensive instruments his parents had bought in the hope of awakening his passion for music. When they arrived at the small building where Juliana lived, Tiago insisted on helping Daniel take him to the apartment. The contrast between his luxurious condominium and that simple building, with no elevator and narrow hallways, made him reflect on the different Brazils that coexisted in the same city. "Thanks for your help," Juliana said at the apartment door, visibly uncomfortable having him there. "We can reschedule our class for another day." "Don't worry about that now," Tiago replied, genuinely concerned for the boy. "Is there anything you need? Medicine? Food?" "We're fine, thank you," she replied, with that dignity that had impressed him since their first meeting. Tiago nodded, respecting her reservation. "I'll call tomorrow to see how he is." On the way back to his office, Tiago couldn't stop thinking about Juliana and Daniel. The image of the small but organized apartment, full of books with the violin taking pride of place, contrasted sharply with his spacious and empty penthouse. There was life there. There was passion, something that had been missing from his own existence for a long time. 3 weeks had passed since the day Tiago met Daniel. The French lessons had become regular, twice a week, always at the same cafe on Main Avenue. As time went by, the relationship between teacher and student began to develop into something closer to friendship. Juliana, who had been reserved, at first began to open up more, sharing stories from her career as a translator and teacher. On a particularly pleasant late afternoon, while they were practicing business vocabulary in French, Tiago paused and looked directly at Juliana. "Can I ask you a personal question?" She raised an eyebrow cautiously. "It depends on the question." "Why did you never go back to work at a language school? From what you told me, you had a stable position, health insurance, all the benefits." Juliana sighed, closing her exercise. "Book, it was a question that brought back difficult memories. When Daniel was 6, he got really sick," she explained, choosing her words carefully. "A serious case of pneumonia. He was hospitalized for almost a month. I needed to be with him, but the school couldn't give me the flexibility I needed. I had to choose between my job and my son." She shrugged, as if the choice had been obvious. "After that, freelancing made more sense. I can adjust my schedule to his needs." Tiago nodded, imagining the challenges of raising a child alone. "What about Daniel's father? Doesn't he help financially?" A brief flash of pain crossed Juliana's face. "Roberto left when Daniel was 5. He said he wasn't ready to be a father. At first, he still sent some money occasionally, but he soon stopped. We haven't heard from him in years." "I'm sorry," Tiago said, genuinely sympathetic. "Don't be," she replied firmly. "Daniel and I make a good team. We get along well together." There was a moment of silence between them, filled with the hubbub of the coffee shop. Then Tiago took a deep breath, as if gathering courage for something important. Juliana, I've been thinking about something for a few weeks, and I'd like to make a proposal. She looked at him with immediate suspicion. What kind of proposal? It's about Daniel. I would like to sponsor his music studies. Juliana blinked several times as if she hadn't understood correctly. What? I want to offer a scholarship so that Daniel can study at the Municipal Conservatory in the capital, Tiago explained. It would cover tuition fees, materials, a suitable instrument, everything he needs to develop his talent. Juliana's face went from surprise to distrust and then to something close to indignation. Why would you do that? You barely know us. Tiago hesitated, searching for the right words. The first time I heard Daniel play, even over the phone, I recognized something special. Then, when you invited me to dinner last week, and he played that Vivaldi piece, Juliana, your son has an extraordinary gift. It would be a waste not to cultivate it properly. We don't need charity, she replied, her voice low but firm. It's not charity, Tiago countered. Consider it an investment in the future. Talents, like Daniel's, are rare. And what would you gain from that? Juliana asked, crossing her arms, defensively. The question took Tiago by surprise. What would he gain? He hadn't thought of it in terms of personal gain. For the first time in a long time, he was acting on impulse, driven by something other than calculating advantages. Honestly? The satisfaction of doing something meaningful, he finally replied. Juliana, I have more money than I can spend. Donations to charities are important, but this would be direct, concrete, transformative. She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to see beyond the polished surface of the successful businessman. I need to think about it, she said finally, and talk to Daniel. I can't make a decision like this alone. Sure, I understand perfectly, Tiago nodded. No pressure. The rest of the class was in a different mood, with Juliana visibly distracted. As they said goodbye, Tiago felt like he had crossed a line. For better or worse, something had changed between them. That night in her apartment, Juliana sat with Daniel at the kitchen table after dinner. The boy immediately noticed his mother's serious expression. Did something happen, Mum? Juliana took a deep breath. Daniel, I need to tell you something, and I want your honest opinion. Do you remember Tiago, my French student? The teenager nodded. He had had dinner with them the week before, and had been impressed by the man's musical knowledge, who had talked animatedly about classical composers and even contemporary music. He made me an offer today. He wants to sponsor your studies at the Municipal Conservatory. He would pay for everything, tuition, materials, maybe even a new violin. Daniel's eyes widened, a mixture of shock and hope. Really? But why? He says he recognized his talent and thinks it deserves to be developed properly. Daniel was silent for a few moments, processing the information. And what do you think, Mom? Juliana sighed, running a hand through her curly hair. I don't know, son. On the one hand, it's an incredible opportunity. On the other, I don't like the idea of owing so much to someone we barely know. Don't you trust him? Her son's direct question made her think. Did she trust Tiago? In the last few weeks, he had shown himself to be attentive, respectful, and genuinely interested in helping. I think I do, he replied slowly. But I still worry about the inequality it would create. It would be a debt we could never repay. Daniel watched his mother with surprising maturity for his 13 years. Mom, remember what you always tell me? That in life sometimes we need to accept help, and that true generosity doesn't expect anything in return. Juliana smiled sadly. I'm being a hypocrite, aren't I? A little bit, the son replied with a smile. Look, if you don't feel comfortable, I understand. We're fine as we are. But if this is a real chance to study at the conservatory... His voice trailed off a little, revealing how deep his desire ran. That night, lying in bed, Juliana thought long and hard about the proposal. Daniel's enthusiastic voice echoed in her mind, along with her own doubts and fears. Finally, she came to a decision. The next morning, after dropping Daniel off at school, he called Tiago. Can we meet today? I'd like to talk about your proposal. A few hours later, they were sitting in the same cafe as always. Juliana got straight to the point. "I have some conditions," he said without preamble. Tiago, who had expected a refusal, looked surprised. "I'm listening. First, this cannot be charity. I want it to be a loan which I will repay when I can. Second, I don't want Daniel to know about this. To him, it will be a scholarship he earned on his own merit, which is true. Third, you will have no say in our lives or decisions." Tiago considered the conditions, admiring Juliana's determination to maintain her independence. "I agree with the third condition without reservation," he replied. "As for the second, I understand your concern for Daniel's self-esteem. But the first, Juliana, I really do not expect or want a refund." "It's my condition," she insisted. "It may take years, but I'll pay every penny." Tiago realized that there was no point in arguing. Juliana's pride was a fundamental part of who she was. "Okay," he finally agreed. "It will be an interest-free loan with no set repayment term. Is that acceptable?" Juliana nodded, feeling both relief and apprehension. "I'll need your help presenting this to Daniel as a merit scholarship." "We could say it's an initiative of my company for young talent," Tiago suggested. "Technically, it wouldn't be a lie. I own the company and I'm really investing in young talent." A small smile appeared on Juliana's face. That could work. In the following days, Tiago mobilized his contacts to secure an audition for Daniel at the prestigious Municipal Conservatory in the capital. The director, an old friend from social circles, was intrigued by the businessman's sudden interest in an unknown young violinist. The audition was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon. Juliana managed to get time off from work and accompanied her son, as did Tiago, who insisted on being present. In the elegant auditorium of the conservatory, Daniel, dressed in his best clothes, adjusted the borrowed violin on his shoulder and began to play Vivaldi's Primavera. From the first notes, it was clear to the examining board that they were looking at an exceptional talent. The technique still needed refinement, but the musicality and expressiveness were impressive for someone with so little formal training. At the end of the presentation, the silence that followed was broken by spontaneous applause from the teachers. The principal exchanged meaningful looks with Tiago, as if to say, "You were right." 2 weeks later, the official letter arrived. Daniel had been accepted into the conservatory's special Young Talent program with a full scholarship sponsored by Moreau Enterprises for exceptional students. Daniel's cry of joy as he read the letter echoed through the small apartment. Juliana, with tears in her eyes, watched her son skip around the room, hugging the violin as if it were a treasure. At that moment, all her doubts disappeared. It was worth it, regardless of the deal with Tiago. When he called to tell Tiago the news, his voice was shaking with emotion. He did it. The letter arrived today. "I knew I could do it," Tiago replied, and there was genuine satisfaction in his voice. How did he take it? "He's over the moon. I've never seen him so happy." There was a moment of silence on the line. Then Tiago spoke, his voice softer. "Thank you for trusting me, Juliana." "Thank you for believing in his talent," she replied, sensing that something fundamental had changed between them. That night, as Daniel slept, exhausted from all the emotion, Juliana sat on the small balcony of the apartment looking out at the city lights. A new phase was beginning for her son, and perhaps for her as well. What had begun as a professional relationship between teacher and student had transformed into something more complex, a partnership based on mutual trust and respect. What Juliana didn't know was that while she was looking to the future with renewed hope, Tiago, in his luxurious penthouse, was also reflecting on the changes in his life. For the first time in years, he felt truly connected to something bigger than his own success. Daniel's happiness and Juliana's reluctant gratitude had awakened long dormant feelings in him: empathy, purpose, meaning. 3 months had passed since Daniel had entered the conservatory. The boy was visibly flourishing under the guidance of his expert teachers, and his new violin, a top-quality instrument that Tiago had insisted on including as part of his scholarship, seemed like a natural extension of his arms. Juliana and Tiago's French lessons continued, but they had transformed into more informal meetings, where they talked about literature, music, politics, and inevitably, Daniel's progress. On a Saturday afternoon, Tiago surprised Juliana with an invitation. "I'd like you and Daniel to accompany me to an event next week," he said, as they walked through Villa Park after an impromptu outdoor class. "What kind of event?" she asked, cautious as ever. "A benefit dinner for the Cultural Foundation. There will be a performance by young musicians, and I thought Daniel might like it. Also," he hesitated briefly, "I'd like to introduce you to some people who work on educational projects." Juliana frowned. "Tiago, I don't know if we would feel comfortable at an event like this. It's not our environment." "Please consider it," he insisted gently. "Daniel deserves to know this world if he wants to pursue a career in music. And he smiled, "you underestimate yourself. With your knowledge of languages and culture, I'm sure you would impress many people." After some reluctance, Juliana ended up accepting. On the day of the event, however, she faced a crisis of confidence due to her limited wardrobe. "Mom, you look beautiful," Daniel assured her, already dressed in the suit he wore to his conservatory performances. The boy, always sensitive to his mother's insecurities, added, "And if anyone thinks otherwise, that's their problem." Juliana smiled, adjusting the only party dress she owned, a simple yet elegant navy blue number she reserved for special occasions. "When did you become so wise, huh?" Tiago came to pick them up in his luxury car. When he saw Juliana, he paused appreciatively. "You look stunning," he said sincerely. The event was taking place in one of the most elegant hotels in the capital. As they entered the ballroom decorated with elaborate floral arrangements and sophisticated lighting, Juliana felt a knot in her stomach. She was completely out of her comfort zone. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed fascinated by the atmosphere, especially when he spotted a string quartet positioned in a corner of the room. "Don't worry," Tiago murmured, noticing her tension. "You belong wherever you choose to be." The first few hours were challenging for Juliana. Although she was fluent in several languages, she felt out of place in the conversations about yachts, properties in Miami, and investments in the financial market. Tiago, noticing her discomfort, made a point of including her, highlighting her career as a translator and teacher. The situation changed when an elegant lady, introduced as Dr. Helena Valois, director of an educational foundation, engaged Juliana in a conversation about the challenges of language teaching in the country. "Tiago told me about your work in translation and teaching," Helena said. "You know, we're developing a scholarship program for language teachers in underserved communities. Someone with your experience would be a valuable consultant." Juliana blinked, surprised by the direction the conversation was taking. "Me? But I have no experience with curriculum development or educational policies." "They have real-life experience, which is infinitely more valuable," Helena countered. "Teachers who have faced the same difficulties we are trying to solve." Meanwhile, Daniel had been introduced to a violinist from the Municipal Symphony Orchestra who invited him to go behind the scenes at a rehearsal. The teenager returned to the table beaming, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "Mom," Maestro Carlos said, "I can watch rehearsals whenever I want." And he showed me scores for pieces I didn't even know existed. The night wore on, and Juliana was surprised to realize that she was actually enjoying herself. The people Tiago introduced her to were not the frivolous stereotypes she had imagined. There were doctors who dedicated part of their time to volunteer work, business people involved in social projects, artists committed to the democratization of culture. During dinner, sitting at a round table with other guests, Tiago asked to speak for a short speech. "I would like to thank everyone for coming and share a little story," he began. "A few months ago, I met an extraordinary young violinist named Daniel Diaz. His talent impressed me so much that my company decided to create a scholarship program for talented young musicians." He smiled at Daniel, who blushed deeply. "Tonight marks the official launch of this program, which we plan to expand to include other promising young artists from underprivileged communities." Juliana looked at Tiago, stunned. He hadn't mentioned anything about launching an actual scholarship program. What had started as a cover story to help Daniel was turning into something much bigger. The applause was enthusiastic, and soon several people approached, interested in knowing more about the initiative. Amidst the excitement, Juliana managed to get a moment alone with Tiago. "You didn't tell me about this," she whispered, torn between surprise and admiration. Tiago shrugged, a little embarrassed. "It was a recent decision. After seeing Daniel's progress, I realized that there are many other talents out there who just need a chance. And to be honest, I've never felt as good about an investment as I do about him." Before they could continue their conversation, they were interrupted by Helena Valois. "Tiago, what a wonderful initiative," she praised. "And Juliana, I'm serious about our foundation. We would love to have your advice on the language program. Could we meet for coffee next week to discuss the details?" Juliana hesitated only for a moment. "It would be my pleasure," she finally replied, feeling strangely excited at the prospect of contributing to something meaningful. On the way home in the silent car, Daniel fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted but happy. Juliana watched her son in the rearview mirror, feeling a gratitude she could barely express. "Thank you for the evening," she said simply. It was transformative for him. "For all of us, I would say," Tiago replied, with a look that said much more than his words. The following week, Juliana's life took on a new rhythm. In addition to her regular classes and translations, she now had meetings with Helena Valois to discuss the language teaching program for underprivileged communities. The idea was to create a method adapted to local reality that could be implemented in public schools and NGOs. During one of these meetings, while presenting her ideas for a multicultural curriculum, Juliana casually mentioned the difficulties she faced as a single mother. "You know, one of the biggest challenges is logistics," he explained, "juggling Daniel's class schedule, my freelance work, meetings like this. Sometimes it feels impossible to be everywhere." Helena nodded thoughtfully. "Have you ever thought about creating a support network for mothers in the same situation? Sharing rides, taking turns looking after the children." The suggestion kept echoing in Juliana's mind. That night, as she prepared dinner and Daniel practiced his violin in his room, she began to mentally develop what this support network would look like. She imagined an app where single mothers could connect, share resources, exchange services, and most importantly, support each other. When Tiago called to confirm his French class for the next day, Juliana couldn't contain her excitement and shared the idea. "It looks brilliant," he replied, genuinely impressed. "Is there something like this on the market already? There are some ride-sharing and babysitting apps, but nothing specific to the reality of single mothers. It would be a platform that understands our particular needs. You should develop this," Tiago encouraged. "I'm sure it would help a lot of women." Juliana laughed, changing the subject. "Of course, because I have so much free time and programming knowledge." "Time can be adjusted, and there are professionals for programming," he replied seriously. "Juliana, this could be really important." The next morning, during French class, Tiago returned to the subject. "I've been thinking about your app," he said, surprising Juliana with the seriousness with which he took what she had considered nothing more than an impossible dream. "I'd like to propose a partnership." Juliana raised her eyebrows. "Partnership? My company could fund the initial development, and you would be the creative mind behind the concept. Your experiences as a single mother and your vision would be the heart of the project." "Tiago, this is—" She hesitated, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the proposal. "I don't know anything about technology, project management, or business models." "But you know everything about the needs of your target audience," he argued. "The rest can be learned or delegated." Tiago's enthusiasm was contagious, but Juliana still had reservations. "Why would you do that? What would be your interest in a project like that?" Tiago considered the question for a moment. "Honestly, after years of building buildings and shopping malls, the idea of building something that actually changes lives for the better is refreshing," he smiled. "Besides, I believe in your potential, Juliana. You have a rare vision and determination." Over the next few weeks, what had started as a vague idea took shape. Juliana, still hesitant but increasingly involved, began documenting all the features she imagined for the app. Tiago, in turn, mobilized his company's technology team to assess the technical feasibility. They established a routine of weekly meetings to discuss the project, always after Daniel's classes at the conservatory. The boy, noticing his mother's enthusiasm, became her biggest supporter. "This is going to help so many families like ours, Mum," he said one night, as Juliana showed him the sketches of the app screens she had designed. "I'm proud of you." Her son's simple words touched Juliana deeply. For years she had focused all her energy on making sure he had opportunities. The idea that she was now pursuing a dream herself, one that could benefit other women in similar situations, was simultaneously frightening and exhilarating. On a Sunday afternoon, while walking through Acclimation Park, after watching a performance by Daniel with the conservatory's youth orchestra, Tiago made a suggestion that would definitively change the course of the project. What if we expanded the concept beyond logistics? What if the app also included opportunities for professional training, legal guidance, psychological support? Juliana stopped walking, visualizing the potential of the idea. It would be a complete support platform, a real community. "Exactly," Tiago agreed, enthusiastic about his reaction. "We could establish partnerships with companies to offer jobs with flexible hours, schools with scholarships, professionals who would donate a few hours of consulting." "Do you really believe this is possible?" Juliana asked, still hesitant to completely surrender to the dream. "With you leading?" "Absolutely," he replied, with a conviction that finally broke through the last barriers of doubt in Juliana's heart. That night, when Juliana returned home, she sat down at her kitchen table and began writing a detailed plan for what she now called the Solo Moms Project. As the ideas flowed, she realized that something fundamental had shifted within her. What had started as gratitude for the opportunity given to Daniel was turning into a personal mission to use her own experience to create something that would support women like her. On the other side of the city, in his penthouse in Jardim, Tiago was also reflecting on the changes in his life. The businessman who had previously only worried about profits and business expansion now spent hours thinking about how an app could make life easier for single mothers. The man who had previously measured success by numbers now measured it by the sparkle in a teenager's eyes as he played the violin, by a woman's determination to transform her personal struggle into a social impact project. The seed of transformation had been planted in both of them and was beginning to bear its first fruits. 6 months had passed since the start of development of the app, now officially named Solidarity Network. The project had grown exponentially, attracting the attention of social investors, companies interested in corporate responsibility, and most importantly, women eager for a platform that met their specific needs. On a Wednesday morning, Juliana entered the Moro Empreendimentos meeting room for a crucial presentation. Wearing a navy blue suit, a gift from Helena Valois, who had become her mentor, she took a deep breath, trying to control her nerves. In the room, in addition to Tiago, there were 5 potential investors, all executives from large companies interested in financing the next phase of the project. "Ladies and gentlemen," Juliana began, her voice firmer than she expected, "the Rede Solidaria app is not just a technological tool. It is a response to an urgent social problem that affects millions." While presenting data on single mothers in the country, the high percentage living below the poverty line, the difficulties in entering the job market, the logistical challenges, Juliana noticed the attentive looks of the investors. Her personal experience, which she had previously considered a limitation in corporate environments, was now her greatest strength. She spoke with authority on a subject she knew intimately. "The first version of the app will be launched in beta next month," he explained, showing prototype screens. "We already have 500 mothers registered to test the ride-sharing, service swapping, and flexible work opportunities features." At the end of the presentation, the investors seemed impressed. The questions were technical and specific, but Juliana, to her surprise, had answers for all of them. Months of hard work on the project had transformed the language teacher into an articulate and market-savvy social entrepreneur. "Ms. Diaz," commented a marketing executive, "your vision for expanding the app is fascinating, especially the idea of connecting companies willing to offer flexible schedules with qualified mothers." By the time the meeting ended, all 5 investors had committed to supporting the project. Juliana stood in the empty room for a few minutes, taking in what had just happened. The feeling was surreal, from a teacher struggling to pay the bills to leading a project with the potential to impact thousands of lives. Tiago entered the room, interrupting his reflections with a wide smile. "You were absolutely brilliant," he praised, genuinely proud. "They were skeptical when they arrived, but you won them over completely." "I still can't believe it," Juliana confessed, dropping into a chair. "When I think about how it all started, with a chance meeting in a cafe," Tiago added, sitting down next to her, "who would have thought that conversation would lead us here?" There was a comfortable intimacy between them now, built over months of working together, shared confidences, and a mutual respect that grew daily. The French lessons had long since been abandoned, replaced by long discussions about the project and, increasingly, personal conversations about their lives, dreams and disappointments. "Daniel has a performance next week," Juliana said, changing the subject. "His first solo concert. He's nervous but so excited." "I wouldn't miss it for anything," assured Tiago, who had become a constant presence in the boy's life, always present at his performances, helping with questions about music theory or simply listening to him practice. Juliana's cell phone rang, interrupting the conversation. She answered, frowning as she recognized the voice on the other end. "Yes, it's her. How did you get my number?" "I see. No, that wouldn't be possible. I'm sorry, but I'm not interested." When he hung up, his face had lost its color and his hands were shaking slightly. "Did something happen?" Tiago asked, worried. Juliana hesitated, visibly disturbed. "It was Roberto, Daniel's father. After 8 years without any news, he suddenly wants to meet his son." "What? How did he know about you guys?" "Apparently, he saw an article about the Solidarity Network project in a business magazine. It had a picture of me and mentioned Daniel as a musical prodigy." Tiago observed the conflicting emotions on Juliana's face: anger, confusion, worry. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing," she replied, determined. "Daniel is at a crucial point. The last thing he needs is the emotional turmoil of meeting a father who abandoned him as a child." Tiago nodded, respecting her decision, but something in his eyes suggested that the matter was not over. In the following days, Juliana immersed herself in work, as she always did when she needed to process difficult emotions. The app's launch was imminent, and there were thousands of details to sort out. Between meetings with developers, interviews with media outlets, and her household chores with Daniel, she barely had time to reflect on Roberto's reappearance. One afternoon, when he arrived home after a particularly exhausting meeting, he found Daniel sitting in the living room, an open envelope in his hands and a troubled expression on his face. "What's wrong, son?" he asked, leaving his bag on the couch and sitting down next to him. "Why didn't you tell me my father got in touch?" The teenager's voice was thick with hurt and confusion. Juliana felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "How did you know that?" Daniel held up the envelope. "He wrote to me. He left the letter at the reception. He says he's been trying to talk to you, but you won't let him." Juliana's heart raced. Roberto had gone to her building and found out where they lived. The feeling of her privacy being violated mixed with guilt for not having spoken openly with her son. "Have you signed up yet? Do it now and tell us which city you're following us from." "Daniel, I was going to talk to you. I was just waiting for the right moment. With the concert coming up, I didn't want to burden you." "I'm not a child anymore, Mother," he interrupted, his voice firmer than Juliana had ever heard it. "I have a right to know about my own father." She took a deep breath, acknowledging the truth in her son's words. "You're right. I should have talked to you first. I'm sorry." Daniel looked at the letter in his hands. "He wants to meet me. He says he's sorry for all these years, that he's changed, that he wants to meet me. And what do you want? Juliana asked, trying to keep her voice neutral despite the whirlwind of emotions. I don't know, the boy confessed. Part of me wants to know him, to understand why he left. Another part is scared and angry too. Juliana hugged her son, feeling the conflict that tore him apart. Whatever your decision, I will be by your side. I need to think, he said, standing up. I'm going to practice a little. Soon the sounds of the violin filled the apartment. Beethoven, Juliana noticed, intense, turbulent, passionate, music as a refuge in moments of emotional turmoil, something she herself had taught her son. That night, unable to sleep, Juliana called the only person she felt comfortable with to share her deepest fears. He's going to get hurt, Tiago, she blurted, tears finally escaping after hours of holding back her emotions. I know Roberto. He gets excited, makes promises, then disappears. Daniel has already suffered abandonment once. He couldn't bear to go through that again. You can't protect him forever, Tiago replied gently. Daniel is growing up, forming his own identity. Knowing his father, even if it is a painful experience, can be important for him. What if Roberto is only interested in the musical prodigy? In his son's potential fame, he has always been an opportunist. Then Daniel will realize this for himself, and you will be there to support him. The conversation continued late into the night, Tiago listening patiently as Juliana expressed all her fears. When she hung up, she felt calmer, although the situation remained painful. The next morning, Daniel surprised her during coffee. I've decided I want to meet you, he announced, determination clear in his voice. But with a few conditions. First, I want it to be in a public place. Second, I want you to be present. And third, he hesitated, I'd like Tiago to be there too. The last condition took Juliana by surprise. Tiago? Why? Daniel shrugged, a little embarrassed. He knows business, he knows people. He'll know if my father is being sincere or not. Besides, he added quietly, I feel safer when he's around. Juliana nodded, moved by the trust her son had in Tiago. The businessman had become a constant presence in their lives, a safe haven amid the transformations of the last few months. The meeting was scheduled for the following Sunday at a coffee shop in the Patio Mall, neutral territory, busy enough to be comfortable but quiet enough for meaningful conversation. Juliana had spent the week in a state of increasing anxiety, torn between final preparations for the app's launch and concern for her son's emotional well-being. When Sunday arrived, Tiago picked them up in his car. On the way to the mall, he tried to ease the tension by talking about Daniel's concert, which would take place the following week, but the nervousness was palpable inside the vehicle. At the cafe, sitting at a discreet table at the back of the establishment, they waited in silence. At 3 p.m. sharp, Roberto entered, older than Juliana remembered, with a few grey hairs at his temples, but still with the same charm that had won her over so many years ago. His eyes, identical to Daniel's, scanned the room until they found him. For a moment he seemed to hesitate, as if only then realizing the magnitude of the moment. Then, taking a deep breath, he walked to the table. "Hello, Juliana," he greeted, his voice betraying nervousness. He turned to Daniel, genuine emotion in his gaze. "You must be Daniel. It's amazing to finally meet you." The teenager nodded stiffly, not extending his hand. Roberto then looked at Tiago, confusion on his face. "This is Tiago." "Moreau," Juliana introduced dryly, "a close friend of the family." Roberto shook Tiago's hand with a forced smile, clearly trying to assess exactly what role that man played in the lives of his ex-partner and son. The initial conversation was uncomfortable, marked by long silences and superficial questions. Roberto tried desperately to establish a connection with Daniel, praising his musical talent and asking about his tastes and interests. The boy responded politely, but with evident reserve. Gradually, the conversation deepened. Roberto explained that he had spent the last few years abroad, working in several countries, and that he had recently returned to his country to take up a position with a multinational company. He spoke of his regret at having abandoned his family, of how young and immature he had been at the time, and how frightened by the responsibilities of fatherhood. "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness," he said, looking directly at Daniel. "But I would like a chance to get to know you, to be a part of your life in some way." Daniel watched his father in silence, his eyes revealing the conflict within him. Finally, he asked the question he had been carrying for years. "Why have you never tried to see me before? Why now?" Roberto looked away, visibly uncomfortable. "It's complicated. There were problems, distance." "The truth," Tiago interrupted calmly, "would be preferable." Roberto gave Tiago an irritated look, but something in the businessman's firmness made him reconsider. Sighing, he admitted, "I saw the article about your mother's app. It mentioned you as an up-and-coming violinist. I was curious, proud too, to be honest. And when I did some more research and saw videos of you playing—" His voice trailed off. "I realized everything I'd missed." Daniel absorbed the information, his face an indecipherable mask. Juliana wanted to protect him, to tell him that they didn't need to continue with that, but she respected her son's silence. "I want to be honest," Roberto continued, now speaking directly to Daniel. "I know I don't deserve a place in your life, but if you give me a chance, I promise that this time I won't disappear." The teenager finally spoke, his voice surprisingly mature. "I can't promise anything. I need time to think." Roberto nodded, accepting the answer. "Fair enough. I can wait." The conversation continued for a while longer, with Roberto sharing some stories from his life abroad and asking about Daniel's classes at the conservatory. When they finally said goodbye, they exchanged phone numbers, with Daniel promising to get in touch when he was ready. In the car on the way home, the silence was heavy. Juliana watched her son out of the corner of her eye, trying to decipher his emotions. "Are you okay?" he finally asked. Daniel looked out the window for a few moments before answering. "I guess so. It's strange. He's a stranger, but at the same time I saw things of myself in him, the way he gestures, some expressions." "How do you feel about seeing him again?" Tiago asked, glancing briefly in the rearview mirror. "I don't know yet," the boy answered honestly. "I need to process all of this." When they arrived at the apartment, Daniel asked for some time alone and went to his room, violin in hand. Soon, the melancholic notes of a sonata filled the room. Juliana and Tiago sat in the small room, both emotionally exhausted. "Thank you for being there," she said, holding his hand. "It meant a lot to Daniel. It meant a lot to me, too." Tiago squeezed her hand gently. "I'll always be here for you both, Juliana. You know that, don't you?" There was an intensity in his gaze that made her heart race. In the last few months, something had changed between them, a gradual coming together, feelings that grew silently, unspoken but increasingly evident. "I know," she replied softly. In that moment of shared vulnerability, with Daniel's music playing in the background, they both recognized that what had begun as a mentor-protégé relationship had evolved into something much deeper and more meaningful. Roberto's reappearance, rather than threatening that connection, seemed to have strengthened the bond between them, crystallizing feelings that had been slowly maturing. The Municipal Theatre was resplendent on that spring evening. The lights of its neoclassical facade illuminated Praça Leopold, while a line of elegant cars unloaded guests dressed in formal attire. The Talents of Tomorrow benefit concert had become one of the most eagerly awaited events on the São Paulo cultural calendar, especially after the announcement that it would feature the solo debut of Daniel Dias, the young violinist who had been winning the admiration of critics and professional musicians. Backstage, Daniel nervously adjusted the bow tie on his tuxedo. At 14, the boy had grown noticeably in the past few months, not just in height but in presence and maturity. His violin, a 19th-century Italian instrument that Tiago had insisted on including as part of the scholarship program, sat in its open case. "Ready for the big moment?" Juliana asked, entering the dressing room. She herself looked stunning. In a long emerald green dress, a gift from Helena Valois for the occasion. Daniel smiled, the tension evident in his eyes. I think so. A little nervous, but Professor Andrade says that's good. It adds energy to the performance. He's right, Juliana confirmed, adjusting her son's bow. And remember, no matter what happens out there, I'm proud of you. Always. There was a light knock on the door, and Tiago walked in, elegant in his tuxedo. Can I join the family moment? Daniel smiled, visibly relieved by her presence. Sure. I brought you something for luck, Tiago said, handing the teenager a small box. Daniel opened it curiously, revealing a pair of silver cufflinks engraved with small musical notes. They're beautiful, he murmured, genuinely touched by the gesture. They belong to my grandfather, Tiago explained. He was also a musician. He played clarinet in an orchestra in Rio. I think he would have wanted them to go to someone who really appreciated music. Juliana watched the interaction with a heavy heart. The relationship between Tiago and Daniel had blossomed in recent months, transcending the simple dynamic of mentor and protégé. There was a genuine affection there, a bond that filled the void left by the absence of a father figure in the boy's life. Thank you, Daniel said, carefully putting on the cufflinks. It means a lot. A stage assistant appeared at the door, announcing that it was 10 minutes until the start. The tension returned to Daniel's face. We'll be in the front row, Juliana assured, hugging her son. It's going to be amazing. Take her deep breath and let the music flow, Tiago advised, squeezing the boy's shoulder in a supportive gesture. The rest will come naturally. As they walked to their seats in the audience, Juliana noticed Roberto sitting a few rows back. Since meeting at the cafe almost a month ago, he and Daniel had communicated occasionally by text message. The cautious but curious teenager had allowed this gradual approach, setting his own limits. Roberto had asked to attend the concert, and Daniel, after some hesitation, had agreed. He came, Juliana commented quietly to Tiago, discreetly indicating Roberto's direction. Daniel knows. Yes, he was the one who suggested the invitation, she sighed. I still don't know how I feel about it. Tiago squeezed her hand gently. It's the natural process, Ju. Daniel is figuring out how to integrate Roberto into his life, on his own terms. The use of the affectionate nickname did not go unnoticed. Lately, something had changed between them. Touches that lingered a little longer, looks that communicated more than words, a growing intimacy that they both recognized but had not yet named. The lights dimmed and silence fell over the theater. The master of ceremonies took the stage to welcome everyone and explain the event's charitable purpose: to raise funds for the newly created Progetto Rede Solidaria, an innovative initiative aimed at supporting single mothers across the country. This project, led by the visionary Juliana Diaz and supported by Moreau Empreendimentos, has already impacted hundreds of families and promises to revolutionize the way we understand and support single motherhood in our country, he announced, provoking a wave of applause. Juliana felt her face heat up when she heard her name mentioned. In such a prestigious context, she was still getting used to her new identity as a social entrepreneur, a transformation that she could never have imagined in her wildest dreams just a year ago. After the orchestra's initial performances, it was Daniel's turn. The presenter announced his name, highlighting his youth and impressive trajectory, from public school classes to becoming one of the most promising students at the conservatory. When Daniel walked onto the stage, violin in hand, there was a moment of reverent silence. The boy seemed small in the vastness of the municipal theatre, but his posture exuded a calm confidence. He positioned the instrument, took a deep breath as Tiago had advised, and began to play Max. Bruch's Violin Concerto No. 1. From the first notes, it was clear to everyone present that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Daniel's technique was impressive for his age, but what was truly captivating was the emotion he conveyed. Through his music, a depth of feeling that transcended his youth. Every movement of the bow told a story, every note resonated with a sincerity that touched the listeners' hearts directly. Juliana watched with tears in her eyes, a mixture of maternal pride and pure admiration for her son's talent. Beside her, Tiago was equally moved, his hand firmly holding hers throughout the performance. As Daniel performed the final cadenza, There was a moment of absolute silence, as if the audience needed time to process what they had just experienced. Then, like a wave, the applause began, hesitant at first, then quickly turning into a standing ovation. Cries of bravo echoed through the theater, as Daniel, with a shy smile, bowed in thanks. After 3 callbacks, the teenager finally emerged, visibly moved by the reception. Backstage, he was greeted with enthusiastic hugs from teachers and fellow musicians, many of them adults who now treated him with new professional respect. "He exceeded all expectations," said Maestro Carlos, the conservatory's artistic director, approaching Juliana and Tiago after the concert. "Daniel has something rare, not just technique but soul. I would like to talk to you about possibilities for his future." As the maestro explained about international exchange programs and masterclasses with renowned violinists, Juliana felt a mix of contradictory emotions. Pride in the recognition of her son's talent, but also apprehension about the new possibilities that were opening up, possibilities that could take him away from her. After initial conversations with the conductor, they finally made it to Daniel's dressing room. The boy was surrounded by admirers, including several journalists covering the event. When he saw his mother and Tiago, he eagerly made his way towards them. "Did you see? They really liked it," he exclaimed, his eyes shining with excitement. "It was magnificent, son," Juliana said, hugging him tightly. "You won them over completely." "That interpretation in the second movement," Tiago commented, "was one of the most moving things I've ever heard. Your grandfather would be proud to see his cufflinks on a talent like you." Daniel smiled, touching his cufflinks reverently. It was then that he noticed another presence at the dressing room door, Roberto holding a bouquet of flowers, observing the familiar scene with a complex expression that mixed pride and a certain melancholy for everything he had lost. "Can't see. I come in?" he asked hesitantly. Daniel nodded, and a momentary silence fell over the group. The dynamic was still delicate, emotional territories being carefully negotiated. "You looked amazing there," Roberto said, holding out the bouquet. "Really extraordinary." "Thank you," Daniel replied, accepting the flowers with a small smile. "Thank you for coming." The interaction was brief but meaningful, a small step in building a relationship they were both still learning to navigate. Roberto exchanged polite greetings with Juliana and Tiago before saying goodbye, promising to call during the week. After the concert, an elegant reception was held in one of the theater's halls. As one of the event's main sponsors, Tiago was expected, and he insisted that Juliana and Daniel accompany him. The hall was filled with influential figures from the capital's cultural and business worlds, many of whom came to congratulate Daniel and meet the woman behind the Rede Solidaria project, Miss Diaz. Called out an elegant lady, whom Juliana recognized as the governor's wife. "Your work with the app is inspiring. I would love to hear more details about how we can implement something similar in public policy." As Juliana explained the principles of the project, she felt a hand on her back, Tiago offering silent support as she navigated conversations with people who, until recently, inhabited a world completely distant from her own. The night wore on, and Daniel, exhausted after the adrenaline of the performance, began to show signs of fatigue. Tiago noticed and discreetly organized his exit, ensuring that they could say goodbye to the important guests without prolonging the night too much. In the car on the way home, Daniel fell asleep in the back seat, his violin case tightly clutched in his arms even as he slept. Juliana watched her son in the rearview mirror, amazed at the transformation that had occurred in his life. "What are you thinking about?" Tiago asked softly, noticing her contemplative look. "How much has changed in such a short time?" she replied. "A year ago I was tutoring French and struggling to pay the rent. Now," she gestured vaguely, as if words weren't enough to encompass the magnitude of the changes. "You are now a respected social entrepreneur, leading a project that will transform the lives of thousands of women," Tiago added. "And Daniel is on his way to becoming one of the great violinists of his generation." "Thanks to you," Juliana said, her voice choked with emotion. Tiago shook his head. "I simply offered resources. Daniel's talent was always there, as was his determination and vision for the project. "You are both extraordinary, Juliana. I was simply privileged to recognize that and be a part of the journey." When they arrived at Juliana's building, Tiago helped wake Daniel up and carry his things upstairs. The teenager, still sleepy, murmured good night and went straight to his room, leaving the adults alone in the small living room. "Would you like some coffee?" Juliana offered. "Or maybe some wine? I think we have something to celebrate." "A wine would be perfect," Tiago agreed. Sitting on the small balcony of the apartment, glasses in hand, they gazed out at the city lights. There was a comfortable intimacy between them, built over months of mutual trust and support. "Maestro Carlos mentioned exchange programs," Juliana commented, breaking the silence. "Masterclasses in Europe, international competitions. How do you feel about this?" Tiago asked gently, sensing her apprehension. "Torn," she admitted. "I want Daniel to have every opportunity possible, but the idea of him going to another country, even temporarily—" Her voice trailed off. "It's scary," Tiago added sympathetically. "You two have always been a team." "Exactly. Ever since. He was a baby. It's always been the two of us against the world," she sighed. "But I know I need to let him grow up, go his own way." "You wouldn't be alone, you know," Tiago said, his voice softer. "If Daniel goes on an exchange, I mean." Juliana turned to him, studying his face in the dim light of the balcony. There was a vulnerability in his eyes that she rarely saw, the powerful businessman momentarily replaced by the man who, she now realized clearly, had fallen in love with her. "Tiago," she began, unsure of how to express the complexity of her own feelings. "You don't have to say anything right now," he interrupted gently. "I just wanted you to know that I'm here, not just as a business partner or a family friend, but as someone who cares deeply about you, about both of you." The moment was interrupted by the ringing of Juliana's cell phone. It was Helena Valois, calling to share the excellent news that the event had exceeded all fundraising expectations for the Rede Solidaria project. "We have secured funding for the next 2 years," Helena exclaimed, her voice brimming with enthusiasm. "What's more, the Department of Social Welfare wants to implement the app model as public policy in 3 states. When she hung up, Juliana was beaming. "I can't believe it. The project is really going to happen on a large scale." Tiago smiled, genuinely happy for her. "You deserve it, Juliana. You turned your personal experience into something that will help thousands of women." At that moment, looking at Tiago, the man who had come into her life by chance and ended up becoming a fundamental part of it, Juliana felt a clarity she hadn't experienced in a long time. The barriers she had erected, the fear of trusting, of depending on someone, were finally beginning to crumble. "About what you said before," she began, gathering her courage. "I care deeply about you too, Tiago. More than I ever thought possible." The fool. Look they exchanged communicated everything words could not express, the recognition of feelings that had grown slowly, naturally, through shared moments, challenges overcome together, a connection that transcended the circumstances of their initial meeting. When Tiago slowly leaned toward her, Juliana didn't hesitate. The kiss was gentle, almost reverent, the beginning of something new, but also the culmination of a journey that had begun in that cafe months ago, when a lonely businessman had become intrigued by a single mother who spoke 5 languages. Year after Daniel's memorable concert, Juliana Diaz's life was practically unrecognizable compared to what it had been before. The small apartment had been replaced by a comfortable house in Alto de Pinheiros, with a special studio for Daniel's practices and an office where Juliana coordinated the national expansion of the Rede Solidaria project. The app, officially launched 10 months ago, already had more than 50,000 users across the country. What had started as a simple tool for sharing rides and exchanging services between single mothers had transformed into a full-fledged platform, offering everything from remote work opportunities to legal and psychological assistance. That Sunday morning, Juliana was drinking coffee on the balcony, looking out at the garden where Tiago and Daniel were having a lively discussion while installing an automated irrigation system for the plants. The domestic scene still surprised her occasionally, the naturalness with which Tiago had integrated himself into their lives, the relationship of mutual respect and admiration that she had developed with Daniel, the partnership that flourished both in their personal lives and in their professional projects. "Mom," Daniel called, interrupting her thoughts, "I need to show you and Tiago something." The teenager, now 15 years old and almost as tall as Tiago, had an enigmatic expression that immediately aroused Juliana's curiosity. "What's wrong, son?" "Let's go to the living room," he replied mysteriously. "It's important." In the spacious room, decorated with a harmonious mix of Juliana and Tiago's tastes, Daniel took his laptop and opened an email, turning the screen so they could both see it. "It arrived last night," he explained. "It's from the Millionaire Academy in Switzerland." Juliana felt her heart race as she read the contents of the email. Daniel had been accepted into a 6-week summer program at the prestigious academy after submitting recordings of his performances. What's more, he was being considered for a full scholarship to the regular program, something extremely rare for a young man his age. "Daniel, this is extraordinary," said Tiago, the first to find his voice. "The Millionaire Academy is one of the best in the world for young violinists." Juliana looked at her son, a whirlwind of contradictory emotions in her chest. Immense pride for his talent being recognized internationally, but also apprehension at the prospect of seeing him leave so far away, even if temporarily. "Did you know about this?" she asked softly. "About the inscription?" Daniel nodded a little hesitantly. "Professor Andrade helped me. He said I was ready, but I wanted to be sure before I told you." "I'm so proud of you," Juliana said, hugging her son tightly. So proud." "So, do you think I should accept?" Daniel asked, his voice revealing that despite his growing confidence, he was still a teenager seeking approval. "Of course you should," Tiago replied without hesitation. "It's a unique opportunity, Daniel." Juliana nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Your place is wherever your music can flourish best, and if that's Switzerland, then that's where you should go." Daniel smiled, relieved. "Thank you. I really wanted to go, but I needed to know that you supported me." "Always," Juliana assured, "wherever your talent takes you." In the weeks that followed, preparations for Daniel's trip took over the household. Passports, visas, clothes suitable for the Swiss climate, and long conversations about what to expect from an international experience took place. Roberto, who was in regular contact with his son, offered to accompany him on the trip, as he had business in Europe at the time. "What do you think?" Daniel asked Juliana, clearly torn about accepting his father's offer. "It's your decision," she replied, determined not to influence the developing relationship between father and son. "How do you feel about that?" Daniel thought for a moment. "I guess I'd like him to go. We've gotten pretty close over the last few months and, well, it would be nice to have someone we know there, at least for the first few days." Juliana nodded, acknowledging that her son was growing up, making independent decisions and establishing his own relationships. "Then tell him you welcome his company." One Saturday afternoon, just 2 weeks before Daniel was due to leave, Tiago invited Juliana to a special lunch. "Just the two of us," he explained. "Daniel is going to spend the day with Roberto, picking out some things for the trip." Juliana found Tiago's slightly nervous tone strange, so different from his usual confidence, but she agreed. He took her to the Fasano restaurant, one of the most elegant in the capital, where they were received with special deference and shown to a private table overlooking the gardens of Trianon Park. "Any special occasion I should know about?" Juliana asked, smiling as she accepted the glass of champagne the sommelier poured. Tiago smiled, that crooked smile she had come to love. "I just wanted a quiet moment before the rush of the next few weeks." Lunch was spent in a relaxed atmosphere, discussing plans for the Rede Solidaria project, which was now expanding to other Latin American countries, and Daniel's latest updates at the conservatory. Maestro Carlos said he'd never seen anyone master Paganini so quickly, Juliana commented, pride evident in her voice. "Apparently the caprices are a technical nightmare for most violinists, but Daniel just flows with them. He has a rare gift, Tiago agreed, but he also has you as a mother, which explains a lot of his determination and sensitivity. Juliana smiled, still surprised by how easily Tiago could make her feel special. After a year of dating, the Abu businessman continued to treat her with the same admiration as he had in the beginning, valuing her achievements and supporting her dreams. After dessert, Tiago seemed increasingly nervous, checking his phone repeatedly and adjusting his tie unnecessarily. Finally, he took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "Juliana, there's something I want to ask you." She looked at him, puzzled by his sudden seriousness. "What's wrong? Is everything okay?" "Everything is perfectly fine," he assured her, holding his hands out on the table. "In fact, I've never been better in my entire life." Before she could continue, there was a soft sound coming from the entrance to the private room. Juliana turned, surprised to see Daniel enter, violin in hand, followed by a string quartet composed of musicians from the Municipal Symphony Orchestra. "What's going on?" she asked, confused, looking from Daniel to Tiago. "Just listen," Tiago requested softly. Daniel took his place with the quartet, and after a brief nod, they began to play. Juliana immediately recognized the melody, Por una cabeza, the tango by Carlos Gardel, that she had once mentioned to Tiago as her favorite piece. Daniel took the violin solo, interpreting the melancholic and passionate melody with surprising maturity, filling the room with pure emotion. As the music flowed, Tiago rose from his chair and, to Juliana's utter astonishment, knelt beside her. In his hands was a small blue velvet box. "Juliana Diaz," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "In the past 18 months, you have transformed my life in ways I never imagined possible. Before I met you, I had success but no purpose. I had possessions but no real happiness." The music continued in the background, Daniel watching the scene with a knowing smile as he led the quartet. "You have taught me the true meaning of courage, determination, and unconditional love," Tiago continued. "You and Daniel have become my family, the center of my world. And now, as we prepare to support Daniel on his journey, I want to ask if you would allow me to be by your side on all future journeys, as your companion, partner, and if you will do me the honor, your husband." Opening the box revealed a delicate platinum ring with a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, elegant and understated, perfectly suited to Juliana's style. "Juliana Diaz, would you do me the honor of marrying me?" Tears filled Juliana's eyes, and for a moment she was speechless. She looked at Daniel, who nodded encouragingly without stopping his playing, then turned to Tiago, whose eyes reflected a vulnerability and hope that touched her deeply. "Yes," he finally replied, his voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Tiago, I will marry you." The smile that lit up his face was worth more than all the words. Placing the ring on her trembling finger, Tiago stood and kissed her, while Daniel and the quartet concluded the piece with a triumphant flourish. The musicians discreetly left, leaving only Daniel, who came to hug his mother and Tiago, forming a group hug that perfectly symbolized the family they had become. "Did you know this all along?" Juliana asked her son, wiping away her tears. Daniel smiled, proud of his role in the surprise. "We've been planning it for weeks. It was hard to keep it a secret." The three had lunch together, celebrating their engagement and talking excitedly about future plans. For Juliana, the moment represented a complete cycle. From a single mother struggling to raise her son and pay the bills, to a professionally fulfilled woman with a social impact project and about to marry a man she loved and respected deeply. As they drove home, Daniel fell asleep in the back seat of the car, exhausted from the emotional intensity of the surprise performance. Juliana stared at the ring on her finger, still taking in the magnitude of the moment. "What are you thinking about?" Tiago asked, noticing her contemplative look. "How life can change so completely in such a short time," she replied. "If someone had told me 2 years ago that I would be here today. Fate," Tiago commented, smiling. "Or maybe just life rewarding someone who deserves every moment of happiness." 2 weeks later at Guarulhos International Airport, Juliana hugged Daniel for a long time, trying to hold back her tears. The teenager, a mix of nervousness and excitement for the adventure that awaited him, returned the hug with equal intensity. "I promise to call every day," he assured her. "And it'll only be 6 weeks, Mum. I'll be back before you know it." "I know," Juliana replied, adjusting the collar of her jacket in a motherly gesture. "I'm so proud of you, my son. So proud." Roberto waited discreetly a few feet away, respecting the moment between mother and son. Over the past few months, he had genuinely tried to rebuild a relationship with Daniel, and although the path had been marked by ups and downs, they both seemed to have found a balance that worked for them. "Take good care of him," Juliana said to Roberto when it was her turn to say goodbye. "You can trust me," he assured me with a seriousness that seemed sincere. "I'll do my best to help you settle in comfortably." Tiago, who had been by Juliana's side throughout the process, hugged Daniel tightly. "Remember what we talked about taking advantage of every learning opportunity," he told the teenager, "and don't forget that we'll be there for the final concert no matter what." "I won't forget," Daniel promised, visibly moved by the support from both of them. "Thank you for everything, Tiago, really." The boarding announcement echoed through the terminal, signaling that it was time to leave. With one last group hug, Daniel followed Roberto toward the boarding gate, turning around several times to wave before disappearing into the restricted area. Juliana remained motionless, watching the spot where her son had disappeared, a complex mix of emotions dominating her chest. "He'll be fine," Tiago assured, hugging her shoulders. "He's an extraordinary boy." "I know," she replied, leaning back into his embrace. "We've just never been apart for this long before." "It's just the beginning," Tiago said softly. "Daniel has a talent that will take him to stages all over the world, and we'll be there to support him every step of the way." On the way back, home, Juliana was silent, processing the new reality. The house without Daniel would feel strangely empty, even with Tiago's constant presence. It was a necessary adjustment, she knew, the beginning of a new phase in which her son would gradually build his own life. "What are you thinking about?" Tiago asked, a question that had become common between them. "New beginnings," she replied, lacing her fingers with his. "Daniel on his journey to Switzerland, us planning our wedding, the Solidarity Network project expanding to other countries. That feels like we're all transitioning into something new." "Transitions can be scary," Tiago commented, "but also incredibly invigorating." Juliana nodded, reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them here. "You know what amazes me the most? How it all started with something so simple, a chance meeting in a cafe." "The famous butterfly effect," smiled Tiago. "Small actions, big consequences." When they got home, Daniel's absence was palpable, but there was also a sense of new horizons opening up. On the table in the living room, the laptop was open with the Progetto Rede Solidaria website, displaying hundreds of testimonials from women who had found support, opportunities, and community through the platform. Juliana sat reading some of the stories. Mothers who had found flexible employment, mothers who shared resources to care for their children, women who supported each other through times of crisis. Each story represented a life transformed, an expanded reflection of her own journey. "We built something really meaningful, didn't we?" she commented, feeling Tiago's arm wrap around her affectionately. "You built it," he corrected. "I just believed in your vision." "We're a good team," Juliana smiled, looking down at the engagement ring that sparkled on her hand. "In every way." That evening, as they prepared a simple dinner together, the phone rang. It was Daniel, already settled into his hotel in Geneva, eager to share his first impressions. The teenager's lively voice, describing the city, the hotel, the other young musicians he had met, brought Juliana comfort. "Classes start tomorrow," he said, excitement evident in his voice. "Professor Kleinman, the one who recorded all of Paganini's Caprices, is going to be my main tutor." After they hung up, with the promise of a video call the next day, Juliana felt a peace she hadn't expected. Her son was on his way, exactly as he was meant to be. And for the first time, She didn't feel torn between her own aspirations and his needs. They were both flourishing, each in their own way. "I think we'll be fine," she said to Tiago as they set the table for dinner. "More than fine," he replied, kissing her softly. "We're just getting started, Juliana. Just getting started." Weeks later, in the studio of a major television station, Juliana was finishing an interview about the impact of the Rede Solidaria project. The program, one of the most watched in prime time, had dedicated a special segment to the app that was revolutionizing the lives of single mothers across the country. "Finally, Juliana," asked the presenter, "what message would you leave for the women who are watching us and facing the challenges of single motherhood?" Juliana thought for a moment, searching for the right words to express everything she had learned on her journey. "I would say that you are not alone," she finally replied, "that there is strength in community, in unity, that your struggles are valid, your stories matter, and that, together, we can create networks of support that turn hardships into opportunities. And most importantly, never underestimate the power of a chance encounter, of an unexpected connection. Sometimes, that's how the biggest transformations begin, with small moments that, looking back, we realize were turning points in our lives." When she left the studio, Tiago was waiting for her with a bouquet of flowers. On her cell phone, a message from Daniel. He had been selected to play as a soloist in the closing concert of the summer program, an honor rarely granted to students so young. "Another achievement to celebrate," commented Tiago, showing him the message. Juliana smiled, feeling that familiar mix of pride and gratitude that had become a constant in her life. Of all the transformations she had experienced in the past 2 years, perhaps the most significant was this: the ability to look to the future, not with fear or apprehension, but with hope and confidence. "Where to now?" Tiago asked as they walked to the car. Juliana intertwined her fingers with his, pondering the question that seemed to encompass much more than her immediate destination. "To the future," he replied simply. "Together. The more you comment and share, the more we can bring you stories that touch your heart. Leave your name in the comments, and we may include you in one of our next stories with a special greeting just for you."